Our next presentation is for the Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan, and this is a presentation, an overview of the new Bike and Pedestrian Master Plan. We have a whole group here from Kimley-Horn. We have our departments of Parks and Recreation, Steve Chanley, Public Works, Steve Cahoon, and I think we have members of the Bike and Ped Committee here as well. Katelyn?
So this intent was really promoted through the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. What we were trying to achieve with this master plan was really identifying recommendations that was going to identify facilities for all types of users: pedestrians, recreational cyclists, families, transportation cyclists and users. And how do we encourage people and feel comfortable in using these bicycle and pedestrian facilities for both recreation and transportation? We also wanted to prioritize these for implementation. Understanding there are limited resources to actually get these projects constructed and in use, we wanted to make sure that we were identifying projects that were going to have the most benefit and impact to the county and how to prioritize those so when resources come in, you all know where to allocate that funding. And then we also wanted to identify some softer strategies to really focus on what are things besides infrastructure that can be achieved as part of this master plan, such as bike to work day, wayfinding and signage, and just encouraging people to look at these forms of transportation and recreation. So just a little background on existing conditions. We documented that. I mentioned county demographics, understanding your existing infrastructure, as well as looking at things such as crash history here that included your more vulnerable users of bicycle and pedestrian transportation users. So you guys at a starting base have 26 miles of existing trails here. That's made up of 17 different facilities, 3 miles of bike lanes, and over 110 miles of sidewalks, most of those located within the towns. But you really start with a great base of a bicycle and pedestrian network to build off of, which is what we want to do. We want to capitalize on where infrastructure investment has already been made. We wanted to talk a little bit about the stakeholder input that we heard. We had one stakeholder meeting with bicycle and pedestrian advocates. We had one with county and town staff, and we actually had one with economic development staff too. But some of the key things that we heard, a lot focused on the north and south route 50 network connections that are needed, which you're nodding your head. Yes, we heard that a lot. Connections between a lot of the towns was identified as well. A sidewalk retrofit program was also mentioned, and the importance of trails as a tourism attraction, right? Outside of use by your residents, how do you attract people to Queen Anne's County to use these facilities, spend money here, right? Because these facilities are great, they're well connected, and it's a great attractor. So through all that public engagement, we developed vision and goals. So they're up here: safety, accessibility, connectivity, equity, multimodal, and health and comfort. So this was really developed through a lot of the public engagement we heard, and these guided the process in how we were going to evaluate the different routes that were recommended. Existing plans. We also wanted to honor that the county has done a lot of work, and as well as the state, in terms of projects that identify bicycle and pedestrian plans and needs. So we reviewed a lot of those existing plans. We worked with Maryland Department of Transportation, created a level of traffic stress. This lets you know what it feels like to bike on a road based on speed, number of lanes, daily traffic that's out there, and that was really a large guiding principle as we were developing recommendations. And then we also looked at other project considerations as we looked at those existing plans to make sure that these items that you see down here, the Chesapeake Bay crossing study, the sidewalk gap analysis, the pedestrian overpass and Cox Creek connectivity, and then Rails to Trails program were reflected within this master plan to make sure that that is adopted and those move forward in terms of feasibility and moving forward to help build this network. So we then developed route recommendations. We looked at different origins and destinations that was identified through the public, through that online mapping, as well as the in-person public workshop. We looked at the comprehensive plan, which had a lot of routes developed as well. We used the Maryland bicycle level of traffic stress to identify where do you really have high stress roads that you need a separated facility that would encourage use by a variety of user types. And then we married all that up with existing conditions to determine what routes really make sense when you're building a county-wide network and what are some of the constraints that are there. So we're going to go through a couple slides that have some maps. These are a little difficult to read, but as you can see, what was recommended from this project really was a comprehensive set of projects that build upon where you all have your facilities of the Cross Island and the South Island Trail, and where we heard from the public they wanted to connect, right, in between a lot of the towns, looking at other ways that you could connect that maybe are different than how you would drive between some of those facilities. And so after we developed all these routes, we wanted to prioritize them. So going back to those project goals, what we did was we created criteria that could be spatially analyzed. That just essentially means we put it all on a map and we ran it against the route recommendations that we had on there, and it let us know which of the routes were satisfying things like connecting to an existing trail, for example, or in an area of the county that has high zero car households, or where you have bus stops and park and ride lots. So we ran that analysis. We had to weigh them against one another to prioritize, right? When we're looking at these different categories, how do we start to weigh them a little bit differently? We could apply them evenly across all of them, but through the public feedback, connectivity was brought up consistently, right? So we knew that that needed to be highly prioritized. Safety was also something that was mentioned in terms of feeling unsafe, wanting to make sure that where there were higher stress areas or a history of vulnerable user crashes, wanted to have facilities in those locations. So this was how the different criteria were weighted. So what we did was we didn't want to rank these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We wanted to put them in your top tier, your middle tier, and your bottom tier, essentially, because they all do build connectivity, address safety, increase accessibility. It's more of which of these projects, right, we're bubbling up to the top, that as you get resources, where should you maybe consider a project from the top tier that may increase your connectivity, may increase where you have a history of unsafe conditions, where you have higher level of traffic stress. So these were the projects that fell into the top tier. As you can see, many of them are close to your existing trails because, like we said, we want to build upon the infrastructure investments that you have already made, and we heard that repeatedly during our public process of we've got to get things connected and we have to build upon those existing trails. All right, middle tier we have here. So as you can see, this starts to build upon the top tier project, starts to go out a little bit more into the rural parts of Queen Anne's County, and then gently, your lower tier projects. A lot of these are more of additional options for making connections between your towns, are more along your, I would say, roads that current cyclists are out using right now for recreational purposes, along higher stress roads, that a facility would be great there when we're starting to think about trails and bicycle and pedestrian facilities as an attractor for tourism, as well as wanting people to move to Queen Anne's County because of the network. I'm going to give you the clicker back.
Long to build to Queenstown, vice versa.
So that depends.
What was the question?
We have access to Queenstown links.
So it's a matter of, next step would be funding a feasibility study to look at specific sections of the trail. If that's a top priority, that would be, the commissioners would guide what our top priority is. But it would be funding a feasibility study. At this point, we would take the concept in this plan and put it on the ground and look at a detailed route. How would we actually do it? How would we get there? Where would the trail go? What land would we need? Where would we put a trail in existing right of way? And where would we need to get additional land? So the next step for all these trails is the feasibility. So that's really, this gives us a starting point. This outlines our public intent to do this. This is going to be an adopted public policy document that will help us secure funding, and it'll be used to get grant money to go out to implement projects. So
each one of these routes is going to require a feasibility study. Just because you see it on paper going this way, the feasibility study may make a different route because it makes sense.
Because of land acquisitions or areas where ideally they would want to go, but there's always going to be a hiccup. You said that the top priority or one of the top priorities was the connectivity from the north side of 50 to the south side of 50.
Yes.
Like pedestrian, bike, crossover.
I mean, we heard that repeatedly, but that's something that would also need to go to feasibility, right? That's a,
I move to adopt the proposed 2024 pedestrian and bicycle master plan proposed by Kimley-Horn.
Second.
Kimley-Horn.
Do we have a second?
Yes.
Patrick,
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on this? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So moved.
All right, get
Great
to
work.